I'm Valerie Khoo, and I'm CEO of the Australian Writers Centre, the world's leading centre for writing courses. Today, I'm talking to Jenny Jackson, based out of Brooklyn Heights. Her debut novel is Pineapple Street, and it's already a New York Times bestseller. She's also executive editor at Alfred A. Knopf, which is part of Penguin Random House. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on Pineapple Street. Wow. Okay, so for readers who haven't got a copy yet, what is it about?
So, Pineapple Street is the story of three women in one wealthy Brooklyn Heights family. We have Darlie, the oldest sister who was born with money, Sasha, the in law who's married into money, and then we have Georgiana, the millennial conscience of the family who wants to give all her money away.
So why did you want to write this book?
I wanted to write about a family. I wanted to write about a group of people who love each other very much, but who often misunderstand each other's intentions. And then I also wanted to write about this strange time that we're living in where people are set to inherit in America the greatest fortune in history. It's called the Great Wealth Transfer. And yet, the generation that is set to inherit this money, millennials, have a very complicated relationship with wealth and with generational wealth.
So the American cover of the book actually looks quite different to the Australian cover, which is this one. And the author that blurbs it in America is different to the authors who blurb it in Australia, who are Helen Fielding, the author of Bridget Jones's Diary. And at the top here, it is Kevin Kwan, who obviously wrote the phenomenon Crazy Rich Asians. Now, the thing is, Kevin wrote Crazy Rich Asians, and he is unashamedly part of that 1%. He comes from that world. Are you?
I am not a billionaire. I am not. I am a middle class girl from New England who happens to be an expert eavesdropper. So I live in Brooklyn Heights, and I actually lived on Pineapple Street when I was writing this novel. And I think that one of the advantages of being an outsider is that sometimes you're able to see things that an insider might not even notice about themselves. And so, when I go to my children's preschool auction, their fundraiser, and I see that they're auctioning off a child-sized Tesla or a mommy's Botox party, I'm like, this is ridiculous and this has to go in a book. And so one of my sort of secret superpowers is being an outsider who has had some access to this world, but who can still kind of see the foibles and poke fun at it.
So let's just talk about your career before Pineapple Street. You work as an editor at Penguin Random House, or at Alfred A. Knopf, part of Penguin Random House. Did you always wanted to get into the book publishing industry, or did you have a career before that?
No, I did. I wanted to be a writer when I was younger, and I studied writing in high school and college. And then when I graduated college, I thought, well, I need to be able to pay rent. I should get a job. And hilariously, I thought publishing would be a great way to make some money. Publishing is just not lucrative, but I really wanted to be with books. I wanted to work with books. And I fell in love with my job. I mean, ask any of my friends. I've had the same job for 20 years, and it's been such a happy career for me. I find working as an editor extremely rewarding. It's intellectually intimate. You get to shape stories, and I just get paid to be part of the best book club on the planet. And so that was enough for me for 20 years.
So then what was the catalyst for you to finally write your own novel, which has become a New York Times bestseller, is like a Good Morning America pick? I mean, insane.
It has truly been wild and thrilling. I wrote the novel starting in 2020 when we were all working from home. So I started it around in the fall of 2020, and it was sort of in the US, it was after the real true panic had passed, but we were still all remote. We weren't seeing our friends, we weren't going to restaurants, we weren't going to parties. And I was just longing for the sparkliness of the social world. I missed gossiping and flirting and seeing people. And I missed all of that fun. And so I sat down to write a novel that was full of all of the things I so desperately wanted to do. It's not a coincidence that Pineapple Street is full of parties and full of nights out and full of restaurants. I mean, it's everything that I wanted to be doing. And I just poured it all into this book to try and create a joyful world that I missed.
So, but why did you decide to write it? Because you still had the opportunity to write it in the last 20 years, or write a book in the last 20 years. Did you have more time because of lockdowns, or what was it?
The time was some of it. It was a combination of time in that I wasn't commuting and I wasn't going out to dinner and going out to lunch. So I did have some found time, but also very strangely, I think that when I'm doing work, I sort of have two different buckets of energy. And one of them is the energy that goes towards managing my inbox, drafting letters, looking at profit and loss statements, evaluating author tracks, the real analytical part of my job. And then there's this other whole bucket, and that bucket is writing descriptive copy, going out to lunch with agents, charming authors, trying to win beauty contests to get the best authors for Knopf. All of those things are sort of some kind of combination of creativity and charm. And what is writing if not charm? It's you on the page making a reader feel the way you want them to feel. And I just felt like I had all of this kind of pent up energy and I had to put it somewhere.
Mm. And so how did you then divide your day? Did you think I'm just going to try this, or I'm definitely writing a novel? And if it was the latter, did you dedicate, specific times to make it happen?
I was incredibly driven, especially once I got going on it. I was incredibly driven, and I woke up at 4:30 or 5 every morning, and I wrote until about 9 o'clock. And I would take, little breaks because I have small children, and they would get up, and I would, give them something to eat. But pretty much, they really didn't mind if I ignored them for 2 hours and let them watch cartoons and, eat chocolate chip granola bars. And it was just a few months. And then after I was done writing for the day, then I would do my job, and log in and edit and do that work. And then at the end of the day, I would put my kids in the bathtub and pour myself a glass of wine, and then go sit on the closed toilet lid with my laptop. And I would write for another hour while they took a bath, because it was just like that was the only time I had. I had the early mornings and I had that little window at night before bed. And, I think some authors talk about writing nights and weekends. They don't have kids. You can't write on weekends if you have kids. On kids, at weekends, my whole job is like entertaining them, and you can't do late nights because your kids wake up really early. And so for me, it was just those found windows of time.
Wow. So if you wrote from about 5:30 to or 5 till 9:30 and then an hour in the evening, how long then did it take till you had a first draft?
I had a first draft in maybe 5 or 6 months, and then I spent another year making it good.
Wow. Okay.
So it
And
came out fast.
yeah, it did come out fast. Did you have a word count goal?
I did. I tried to do 2,000 words a day.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I was really driven.
In that case, did you know what was going to happen? You had your premise, or what did you start with? Did you start with the characters or just the idea of how this generation deals with money?
So I'm not an outliner. I knew that I had the premise of Sasha, the in-law who moves into her husband's family home and can't quite feel comfortable. And then I knew about Georgiana, and I knew that this character, Georgiana, was a spoiled young woman who would suffer a terrible loss. And I knew what that loss would be. And I knew that that loss would change her and make her want to be a better person. The character who was more mysterious to me was Darlie, which is so funny because in some ways, Darlie and I are the most similar. She's like a really driven, professional, intellectual with two small children. That's me. And so it's so strange that it was the hardest for me to get to her. But I found that she was really flat and just wasn't working until I discovered that Darlie was going to be a passionate math geek who worked in aviation investment banking and who loved airplanes and the business of flying. And, I loved the research I did for that storyline. But in some ways, giving Darlie an intellectual pursuit brought that character alive, and it also changed the stakes. So one of the things that I struggled with in this book is that when you're writing about characters with extreme wealth, how do you ever really put them in peril? Darlie's husband loses his job. So what? They're billionaires. Like, so what? How do you make her have a sympathetic problem, And by giving her a career she loved and showing what it meant for her to lose that career and for her to lose her earning power and what that did to their relationship, that is where the drama came from for that character.
Yeah, I love Dali. I think Dali was great. You mentioned research, having to do research. And of course, there's research in the form of eavesdropping, which is a little bit different to actual research because you can observe what people do socially and how they react in certain situations and so on. But to take Dali as an example, when Dali was in her career before she has kids, and is, as you say, a maths geek and was really into aviation, and she figured out how JetBlue, the airline, did their numbering system on their tickets, and she would buy a ticket at 12:01 in the morning and buy a ticket at 11:59 or on the last day of the month. And because of the numbering, the sequential numbering system, that is how she worked out how many tickets they sold and was therefore really able to analyze how they were tracking. How in the world did you research that or figure that out, or did you make it up?
It's not made up. So don't get me in trouble or don't get anybody in trouble. But I absolutely stole this from a friend. So when my husband and I first started dating, he had two roommates, and one of them was just a total av geek. And on Sunday mornings, we would be lying around, like eating, bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches, watching like Harrison Ford's The Fugitive for the millionth time, just being lazy 25-year-olds on a Sunday. And he would be sitting at his desk trading JetBlue stock because he had figured out this loophole, and he knew how to make money. And so they did shut down the loophole at a certain point, but not before he made himself a pretty penny doing it. And this friend was incredibly helpful in teaching me more about the world. And, it was so interesting because I shared the book with him several times, and he was so into the details of it. And Darlie is so into the details of it. And that's what really makes it alive was him. I flew in his he flies planes. And so I flew in his Sirius with him, and he showed me, this is what makes this plane so special. It has like the leather detailing. It's like being inside a BMW. And also, he knows every single flight route out of JFK. So he'd be like, oh, well, if he's on this flight, American Airlines, they don't have Wi-Fi. So this, see, he helped me figure out plot mechanics. I'm so grateful to this friend, but he won't let me thank him by his name because he's such an insider in that world that he has to protect his anonymity.
Wow. Okay. So apart from your characters, those three women, I mean, there's other such incredibly rich characters. The mother-in-law, I mean, Sasha's mother-in-law, Tilda, who is like the matriarch of the family, and the things she says are just actually so bizarre and funny. How did you paint these characters? Did you do any kind of character development, on their own, like before they even came out on the page? Like, did you kind of think, oh, she would wear this, she would go to that country club, she would, that sort of thing? Or did you let it come out on the page?
Hilda was interesting for me to write because the more time I spent with her, the more over the top she became. And I just started having so much fun with her. There's this one scene where Georgiana is trying to confess to her mother that she has done something really bad. And she says, Mom, have you ever done something that you were ashamed of that made you feel just like you didn't even know who you were? And her mother says, oh, whenever I feel like that, I just go and buy myself some flowers. And not from that florist over in the train station. I go to the one over on Montague and I just have them put together something from the refrigerator case. And you're reading this and you're like, oh my goodness, you are missing the plot, but I just felt like at that point I knew her, and then I really did like sort of rethread the book with her character, because she just came more and more alive. And I know she's the most over the top in the book, but I love having her sort of as a foil to the younger characters because she is the most set in her ways and she is a product of her generation. And one of my true fascinations in this book is the way that our generational identity and even our micro generations very much influence our relationship with class and with inherited wealth.
Books like this, like Crazy Rich Asians, like the ridiculous success of the television show Succession, which are about the one percenters, why do you think they're so popular and we as a society have such a fascination with how these people live?
It's interesting, and I'm going to speak from a very American perspective for a moment, and I'll be curious to know how you feel that this applies or doesn't apply in Australia. In America, we we grew up with a very different attitude than, say, the English. Our traditional structures of class are not quite as baked in. And so we talk a lot about the American dream, and the American dream means being a self-made man, going from nothing to something. So every single one of us on some level have been raised to harbor this dream that one day we will be a millionaire. One day that will be our life. And so there is like a very real aspiration, I think, that a lot of us carry. And it's funny because in some ways it's held us back as a culture because, you know, we continue to vote for policies that increase the income gap and that continue to reinforce the ability of the super rich to hand down money to their children, because we all just have bought into this pretty far-fetched fantasy that we're all going to be billionaires. It's kind of a funny piece of like mass delusion.
Yes. I guess, and it's also just the reading about the mini Teslas that you can buy for your kids, right?
It is also just funny on a certain level, I think,
Mm,
because it's escapism, right? It helps you because money for the vast majority of us is a source of tension in our marriages, it's a source of tension in our families, it's a source of stress. And taking that away is a lovely piece of escape too, just in
mm.
terms of fun reading.
It's also a real source of power, especially in a family, isn't it? And that also becomes evident in various ways in I don't want to give away any spoilers in this story. Um, with this story, you wrote from different points of view, quite a number of different points of view. Was that a conscious decision at the start, or did you kind of start writing or and see what happens?
It was a conscious decision because I wanted to write about a family that loved each other. And I think that when you're writing from close third person, multiple point of view, you get to work in this magic zone that lies between how a character understands themselves and how a reader can understand that character. And that little space is where misunderstandings occur. And so when I would rotate between chapters, you could see that Darlie and Georgiana had heard one story about Sasha and her prenup. When you get to Sasha's story, Sasha has a different version of that, but you can see how a misunderstanding escalates and escalates and escalates. And so by using rotating close third person point of view, I was able to exploit those misunderstandings in a way that I think and hope is satisfying for the reader.
Mm. Now, there's no doubt you brought your 20 years of experience as an editor to this novel. What kind of stories do you edit? Like, do you specialize in a particular area or anything like that?
I do all fiction, but I am all over the map. So I published Kevin Kwan in the Crazy Rich Asians books, and I love working with Kevin. I love working with funny writers. So I also published Helen Fielding's last two books. I published some very literary books. Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11. I published the last two Cormac McCarthy novels. I also published Dolly Alderton, who is so funny. So I really love a mix of voices. And to me, it doesn't really matter whether it is capital L literature or whether it is, women's fiction, because I think it's all valuable and it's all entertaining and can help us all connect.
So I would love to touch on when you get the manuscript in front of you. That's massive, right? It's 80,000, 100,000, whatever words. So where in the world do you start? I mean, obviously you read it, but when
Yeah.
you're reading it in your brain, what is your approach in the first instance to when you think, okay, I've got this manuscript now and I've got to edit it?
Yeah. So I like to do one read through where I don't write anything on the page at all. And as soon as I finish that, I like to write a few paragraphs just about my big picture views on it. And that is really just going to be, gosh, the end doesn't work. And I didn't understand the main character until halfway through, so that's the big picture stuff. And often I actually prefer to just work through that as my first round of edits with the writer, because to me, it feels silly to spend a lot of time, talking about word repetition when there's a good chance they're going to cut whole chapters. But that's really it. Is at the beginning, I like for it to be very conversational with the writer as we do the big picture stuff. But I look at my job as a service to writers, and so I also am so open to working with writers however they like. So I have writers who will send me their work every 30 pages as they go and want comments as they go. I have writers who will not share it until it is absolutely perfect. So I just have to kind of adapt to what they want.
But the ones who share you 30 pages as they go, do you then get feedback on those 30 pages? Because what if they go, oh, actually, they were crap, I'm going to chuck them?
It's those are tricky for me. It's hard, but I find that that's when a writer is in trouble and they need me. And so that's often actually an opportunity more for cheerleading than anything else.
Right, right. So when you wrote this then, were you assigned an editor, and what was it like being on the other side of the fence?
Yeah, so I did not share a single page until it was done and polished, and I felt amazing about it because it was my first time out and I didn't want to embarrass myself. Um, I had an agent who I had decided very early on that I wanted to work with. And so she read the manuscript overnight, said yes, she could sell it for me. So it's of course a little awkward because as an insider, I know everybody in the publishing industry. And so she sent it out to about 20 editors. And I knew some would pass, and that's totally fine. Nobody, no book is, everybody wants. Um, but you know what I discovered? I discovered, that thing they say about how when you're looking to buy a home, you can walk into a house and you just know if it's your home. Turns out it's really the same way picking an editor. I had several conversations, but I had a conversation with Pamela Dorman, and I just knew that that was who I wanted to be with. And we've worked together so beautifully.
Wow. So, but just let's take a step back before you got, editors expressing their interest or whatever. When your agent sent it out there, it must be a very exposing feeling because for 20 years you know these people and
Yes.
suddenly you're laying it all out on the table. First, what did that really feel like and how long did you have to live in that space?
I kept joking to my husband. I was like, honey, I feel like I've gone to med school and it's like the last day of med school. And now I have to take off all my clothes and all my classmates are giving me an exam. And he's like, they don't do that at med school, right? So it was, but I felt totally, totally exposed. But then I know I've had a very charmed experience, but Pamela Dorman got the book in the morning and at midnight wrote and said she loved it.
Oh my God.
I know.
So
So
you
I
didn't
didn't
have to live in that space for very long at all.
know. I understand on every level what a lucky experience that was. But also you can see why I loved her from day one.
Yes, yes. So then the during the editing process, how much did you have to change?
It was a lot. It was a lot and it was really hard. So they made me write another 15,000 words.
Where?
I know. So they had me expand Sasha's story a lot. They had me write more about Sasha's life outside of her marriage. They also didn't feel like um, Ford and Sasha worked through their problems enough. And I didn't think that they were going to ever perfectly work through their, I don't want, sorry, spoilers. Um, that was something that they had me work on. And
Right.
so I added a lot more material there. And then they had me move up. This occurs early in the book, so I feel okay talking about it. But in a previous version, Malcolm is fired later in the book, and they said he needs to be fired in Darley's first chapter. But moving that up meant a reorganization of so many other plot points. So it was a huge challenge.
Wow. Okay. So then, what was the most challenging thing about writing this story?
Oh, the most challenging thing about it was, my writer, Chris Bajalian, who wrote The Flight Attendant, he always says to me, every book tries to kill itself at least once. And I've only written one, but I did get stuck halfway through. And I thought, I don't know, maybe this isn't my book. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And so the having the faith in the book to push through was the hardest point. And I know so many writers get to this same point with their books. And so if anybody listening to this has a book that they got stuck on, I could tell you story after story after story of authors who put a book down for a year, 2 years, 10 years. Julia Glass put 3 Junes down for 10 years before she finished it, and then she won the National Book Award. So, don't give up on yourself. Every book, every book gets tough sometimes.
So you felt that at the midway-ish point, but when you feel stuck, it's very hard to be unstuck. What did you make yourself do to push through?
I took one of the storylines and I pulled it out and I tried to reconceive of it. And I actually moved Georgiana to Boston and gave her a whole different thing. And I messed with it for a week or 2 weeks. And then I was like, well, that's a total failure. And So then I went back to where I was before, but weirdly, that exercise had loosened something and it flowed after that. So it's almost like I needed to mess it up to realize that I had something good before. And it made me more focused and centered on keeping the family together in Brooklyn Heights and keeping that going.
Are you writing the next book?
I have a little bit, and I'm looking forward to this summer to going away and, cozying up with some pages. But it's going to be set in my hometown. I grew up in a beach town in Massachusetts, so a small town novel rather than a big city novel. And I'm excited. I'm excited to immerse myself in that world.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on Pineapple Street. My final question before we go is, what would your top 3 tips be to aspiring writers who would love to be in a position where you are one day with their debut novel published and on the New York Times
My
bestseller list?
Yeah. So, tip number one is to keep a journal and just be a magpie, be an eavesdropper. Whenever you hear something good, just tuck it in the journal because you never know where you might find space for it.
Is that
Tip
what you
num
did? You do that?
I do that. I do that. I actually, maybe this is embarrassing, but I do a lot in my phone also in the notes app just because I'm out and about and I hear stuff. Um, the other thing that I would say is if you're casting about and trying to figure out what your voice is, think about the books that you really love. Think about the books that speak to you and try and put yourself in dialogue with those books. Don't say like, "Oh, thrillers really sell. I'm going to write a thriller." If you don't read thrillers, that's not for you. Try and try and get in conversation with the writers who mean something to you because that is that is the bandwidth that you're going to be operating on. And then the last piece of advice is that it's never too late. I mean, like I'm halfway through my career and this was not something I thought that I was going to do. And it's been so enormously gratifying. So, no matter where you are in your life and your career, it's never too late to write a book. And so, give it a whirl.
I love it. Congratulations on Pineapple Street, and thank you so much for your time today, Jenny.
Thank you, Valerie. I so appreciate it.